Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for participating in this webinar on the Concrete Sustainability Council. My name is James Bogdan. I am with the National Ready Mix Concrete Association, and I am joined today by Michael Sharp of Wholesome and Kristen Bartel with Toolbox. These are leaders of the Concrete Sustainability Council, and we're going to talk about supply chain sustainability and how it's going to benefit our industry, how we're going to compete against other industries with this, and how it's going to help us advance our reputation of an environmentally, socially, and a responsible industry. The agenda today is going to be just talking about general trends of transparency, sustainability, disclosure beyond environmental product declarations. We're going to go through the CSC certification, and then we'll have some final thoughts and Q&A. I'll do the intro, and then Michael and Christian will go back and forth in talking about the CSC certification system. Now, I just want to calibrate our thinking and our perspective around this. And if you look at the images on the screen now, that you see Pluto from a long time ago, and then in 2018, over that 30, some odd years, technology advanced, optics have advanced, lens of disclosure and transparency has advanced. And I show this image because with that technology, we see that in our own society, in our own business, how we conduct business, and that when we talk about things like blockchain or big and shared data or the Internet of Things, or artificial intelligence, there's a lot of information that's out there in our business world that we are subjected to, whether we're creating that information or others are creating the information on our behalf. And we have to understand that information growth is impacting how we're doing business and how our sales channel, our influencers, our customers, our end users are also doing very similar things, because we are, whether in business or in society, we are conducting ourselves in an age of transparency. I'm sure many people have social accounts on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat. My kids have multiple accounts. We have a tendency to be comfortable, exposing ourselves out there in the world of the World Wide Web. But sometimes companies, we're not too comfortable with that. But that's where the trends are going, because we are marketing in the age of transparency. And that is happening because customers and influencers of our sales channel are investigating risks within the companies and the products that they are selecting for their own operations. They're doing this to make an effort to be making more informed and responsible decisions and lower those risks. And those risks have always been related to financial, terms and condition, delivery, performance, but we're now starting to see environmental, social, and governance risks enter into those decision-making processes, and we have to be prepared for that. I use this from an EPD perspective when I give EPD presentations, but this applies to what we're talking about today on the Concrete Sustainability Council and the certification system. Not too long ago, anybody could make any claims on their company or on their product, and that's just called a self-declared claim. However, at least within the United States, we've always had some guidelines and some criteria that bracketed those self-declared claims. It was through the Federal Trade Commission Part 260. Whenever LEED and green building standards started to pop up in, say, the early 2000s, they wanted to navigate away from self-declared claims and wanted to have a little bit more robust and independent certification of a claim. So from a product's perspective, you saw the growth of third-party certifications, whether it was Energy Star, whether it was low VOC paint, whether it was recycled content, or any type of claims that different product categories were making. But as LEED and other green building systems and as overall perspectives of our marketplace started to evolve, we started moving away from those single attribute claims, because again, those certifications only talked about a single tiny part of that product, but they wanted more holistic perspectives on that. And so from an EPD perspective, we went to the route of life cycle analysis, environmental product declarations. That's more of a holistic picture of how that product is being manufactured, how it's being used in its functional use, and kind of long-term impacts that product has. Now, That's pretty robust in our industry. We have engaged EPDs as well as other product categories that we compete with. There's a lot of EPDs in the marketplace, but there's other things that are happening because of green construction standards, such as health hazard, revealing health ingredients and health hazards within products, as well as corporate sustainability or environmental, social, and governance practices. And this trend can also be applied to those particular bullet items on the right of the screen. And because of that, we see one of the fastest growing practices within supply chain management looking at the sustainability of the supply chain. And that is where the Concrete Sustainability Council's certification system comes in to our purview, and how we as an industry need to consider this for ourselves and positioning ourselves and building out our sustainability branding. And so I'm going to pass this over to Michael with Wholesome at this time, who's going to introduce us to the CSC. Michael, I'll let you know if I can hear you, and let me know when to advance the slides.
Thanks a lot, James. I hope you can hear me well, and I'm really pleased to be with you this afternoon. And you can already move to the next slide, James. So I'm just short introduction. Michael Sharp. I'm in charge of sustainable construction at Holcim, and background is an architect. And I was like Christian, involved in the genesis, in the development of the Concrete Sustainability Council from early on. It is a tool, it is a certification system to provide exactly the transparency James was elaborating about. And if you move to the next slide, and beyond that, it had also another rationale, and that was by the time it was early 2010 years. We just did not like the perception of the bias in the perception of materials by that time. So it was already by that time the case that if you ask your partner or anyone else, so what would you, from your gut feeling, consider sustainable construction? Most often you heard the answer, yeah, well, sure, it's a wood construction, which to our opinion is just contradicting built reality and also contradicting a couple of matter of facts. Simultaneously, the public perception of concrete in specific, cement then in more general, had room for improvement. So what you see here on this slide is a European article in The Guardian on concrete and the impact on the environment. You would not see, or you hardly see similar articles for other construction materials. We did not like this in this situation. We didn't like it the more, next slide please, James, because it had its impact in built reality, or in the perception of built reality. So if you look into green building labels such as LEED, and LEED is just a proxy here for many other green building labels which are handling it very similarly. You get awarded, you're scoring with responsibly sourced wood. So this is an assessment of the LEED credit on material sourcing. So you see all the items, all the subjects where you can score points, point by point. So first 3 points are just on wood products. You can only score if you have a wood product with a fulfilling certain criteria. Then 2 products or 2 categories more on reuse, recycling of materials more in generally. And then there was one last point which was called USGBC approved program. We were very happy to see this, because then we approached the USGBC and said, this Concrete Sustainability Council and similar schemes, they could connect to LEED exactly here. And we learned that by that time, the USGBC was just not ready to describe what are the requirements for such kinds of schemes. So it was a null. It was a dead end. So that's the reality in green building labels. You score with wood. You don't have any option to score with any other material, which is, as I mentioned, it's contradicting built reality. If you look into typical larger scale buildings, office buildings, hotel buildings, larger residential, 70 by 80% by mass is built from concrete, and the rest is other materials, among others wood. So with this in mind, we also then approached later on green building labels, because that was then exactly our message. But in the first place, we sat together and we said we have to change something. Next slide. And so we founded in November 2016 the Concrete Sustainability Council. It was really made to, or designed to enable the industry to communicate and demonstrate the positive, sustainable credentials of concrete and the supply chain, cement and aggregates covered covered, subsumized under concrete. So taking into consideration that responsible sourcing more and more becomes an issue in procurement, and then if it's an issue or a topic, a subject matter in procurement, then it's automatically in construction materials, especially mineral construction materials. They are making up for 70% of the weight, as mentioned. So, and then second, or thirdly, we have seen the opportunity that this transparency is something we not only can communicate to external, it's also something, a benchmarking system internally, so that we can also see where are pain points, where's room for improvement in our own operations. So this is a bit the rationale why we have set up the Concrete Sustainability Council. And next slide, who's we? It's a quite large number of associations, NRMCA in the first place, also from LATAM, the FEEP association, and then across Europe a couple of different associations. Also then later on the GCCA, Global Cement and Concrete Association, has been founded later. In the beginning, this has also been a project under the roof of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD. There was a Cement Sustainability Initiative, CSI, and that was also a bit the one parent of the CSC, but also producers from all across the world. You see a lot of companies which have a global footprint here. And last but not least, certifiers. They were very important to give the system the credibility that it required. The system, you will see this later, needs an independent second opinion, which is doing the certification, the approval, and that has been done, or is being done by so-called certification bodies. And they have also been founding members of the Concrete Sustainability Council. Next slide. It started quite slowly in 2016-17. 2017, the first system went live with a couple of certifications. It took up then in 2019, I would say, when the first market was the Netherlands in Europe. Second then to pick up was Germany, and that then, just due to the size of Germany, that gave the CSC a boost. And you see here really the latest, fresh from the press slide, how many certificates we have. Now we are in the order of magnitude of a bit more than 200 for 2021. Looks good also for this year to get a quite decent number together. As Netherlands started, then Germany, but also in many European markets, the CSC is taking up, but also LATAM, quite interesting activities. And now, since we have some connections to LEED, we will talk to this in a minute, and also the NRMCA is our regional system operator in the US. Since then, we see a lot of uptake also in the US, a lot of interest. Good. That's a bit the story behind. Christian will elaborate now in the next slides on the certification in detail.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I'm Christian Artel. To briefly introduce myself, I'm working for Heidelberg Cement and also in charge of sustainable construction. In the United States, our company is active under the brand Lehigh Hansen, which you will probably know, all of you. So the certification in detail, what is the certification? That is basically concrete, the concrete which we are certifying with the Concrete Sustainability Council. So right in the middle of this slide. Concrete is produced obviously in stationary, precast and ready-mix plant, and the certificate addresses both types of plants, even though the majority of the plants that are certified up to today are ready-mix plants. There's also the opportunity for mobile plants to get certified. And following intense dialogues with our stakeholders, with organizations, environmental and social organizations, they gave good argument that the concrete certification should also include the supply chain, namely cement and aggregates. We all know that much of the impact, especially when it comes to CO2 emissions, is related to cement production, and that this should somehow be considered in the product that we hand over to our customers. And also aggregates have a certain impact, especially if we, for example, look into land use or biodiversity related issues. Now, James, if we can please go to the next slide, we have a short look about the key issues. What does the system reward? And there is a number of prerequisites, so things that must be done. And here, very important are ethical and legal compliance. So then human rights. I mean, in the United States, it's obviously evident that we have no child labor, no slavery, but that is possibly not the case everywhere in the world. It's important that we consider indigenous peoples' right, where this is applicable, that environmental and social impact assessments are done, especially when it comes to quarrying, and that the materials being used are traceable. Beyond that, we have an important pillar in management that considers purchasing, but also in particular environmental management, quality management, and health and safety. And then we have a look at the three traditional pillars of sustainability. So environmental in a number of dimensions, social and economics. Very important in environmental is obviously the life cycle impact of our products, land use, energy and climate, then topics like water, biodiversity, and secondary materials. Here we also talk about recycling. Lastly, the chain of custody. So cement and aggregate also play an important role. We will see that later in the presentation. If we go to the next slide, this provides a brief overview on what makes CSC concrete more sustainable than normal concrete. I mean, both concrete batches will be gray, that's not a surprise, but there are very significant differences in the way that has been produced, under what circumstances that has been produced. So all concrete, cement and aggregates which are CSC certified, they follow a framework for ethical and legal compliance, and operations comply with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and they also acknowledge indigenous people's rights. Certified plants, they have also safety procedures in place. To give you just one example, certified plants at the level of silver and higher, they will have to look into reducing CO2 emissions, and levers for that include a transport management system, for example, and creating awareness to the workforce. And for cement, this also includes having a commitment in place to measure and reduce CO2 emissions. Other important topics in CSC certifications where there are differences to standard concrete, standard cement is about extraction. So there is an environmental management system in place when it comes to extraction. It's about moving towards circularity by measures such as recycling a return concrete, not simply dumping it. And it is also by having a look into the supply chain, so using materials from traceable sources. Let's go to the next slide. And here we will see about the weighting of the different ingredients. So concrete is the core of it all. And the main concrete certificate, so a concrete plant is able to do by its own to achieve a certificate at the level of silver. To come then to higher certification levels, it is important that the cement and aggregates contribute. So cement will contribute with up to 25% of the overall score, and aggregates, they can also contribute with up to 15% of the overall score. The certification levels, see that on the next slide, they are determined by the overall fulfillment rate, so the score of the own concrete plant, and what is kind of supplied on top by the cement and the aggregate manufacturers, and by compliance with additional mandatory criteria for higher certification levels. A plant must also, that is important, comply with all prerequisites. Let's have a look at the next slide, and this slide shows the recognition of the CSC certificate for concrete. That is important to say, it's the concrete certificate that is recognized in green building labels. For you, very important, the social equity in the supply chain pilot credit in LEED and Envision, and in Europe there are a few other green building labels here where recognition has been achieved. If we go to the next slide, we will talk now about the governance. And Michael was mentioning this in his introductory part. What makes the CSC certification different is that we clearly have here a third-party validation of all our claims. So we have certification bodies which also provide services in the United States, so which will enable you to do a CSC certification. They look at your claims, at your evidence towards the different criteria of the CSC certification. Your evidence is uploaded in the CSC Toolbox, which we see on the next slide. So here is the limit paperwork. James, if you can please go to the next slide. It is, it's a toolbox, and a web-based toolbox where you upload your evidence. Once this is done, you can provide your chosen preferred certification body with access to this toolbox. Your auditor can assess the documents that are uploaded. He can come to you with questions, and towards the end of the process, the certification will do a number of on-site visits for representative on-site visits. If we look at the structure of the CSC, how we are run, we see this on this slide here. The key decision-making body, I would say, for many items is the executive committee, which is comprised of 12 CSC members, companies, mostly concrete producers, associations, and a representative number also of certification bodies. We have an advisory committee that is very important consulting role in further developing the CSC certification system. It is comprised of social society organizations, of academia, of experts. Day-to-day management is done by the management team, so the chair of the association and the 2 vice chairs and our CSC coordinator, which we have in place. This is Cynthia, who is not here with us today. The 2 vice chairs, their job is also to chair our distinctive committees. So Michael is in charge of the technical committee, and our colleague Richard, who is with CRH, he is chairing the communication committee. We have a secretary who is in charge of the innovation committee, which evaluates applications within the frame of CSC certification, who evaluate innovations. And I would like to hand it back to Michael for the next part.
Michael, before we move on, I'll move on in a second. I failed to announce earlier that anybody has any questions, use the question on your navigation panel. Please get to that questions part, and then you can drop any questions in there, and we'll monitor those and hopefully answer them at the end. But sorry for that, Michael. Please continue.
So what are the opportunities for companies? And you can already go to the next slide, James. So we mentioned what we wanted to generate in a nutshell was FSC for concrete. So we wanted to have something at hand that helps us to convey the positive image of concrete by telling the story of what are the sustainable material issues or the subject matters of concrete. And so we wanted to promote concrete as the sustainable construction material of choice. We wanted to be the ones sitting in the driver's seat on describing what is the sustainability of concrete. So proactively shaping the perception. And all in all, standing there firmly telling the story of a positive material, a genius material with which you can do so many perfect things, and if you do it properly in a most sustainable way, being the most sustainable construction material. So that's a bit from the more general picture. Next slide, James. So in more specific, we wanted to provide an image factor, creating the image of concrete, also having then a way to differentiate and with that also produce cash benefits, tangible cash benefits. And secondly, also having something with which we can just get into a dialogue on sustainability of construction materials, of concrete as a construction materials, with customers and a broad range of stakeholders. And it works. So now that the CSC is out there, we are noticing that we're getting approached by green building labels, by interest groups saying, okay, there is a certification system measuring, benchmarking, and also third-party verifying the sustainability of a construction material. Let's talk. Let's talk about your criteria and whether we can adapt or take up your criteria or parts of your criteria for our own system or for our own initiative. Next slide, James. And so you got to start somewhere. You got to start with describing the different subject matters that make concrete sustainable. And this opportunity to differentiate, it also is starting to work. So we have the recognition, as Christian pointed out, in various green building labels, also in some public procurement systems. And with that, we are also addressing a market or a part of the construction market which is growing above average. So if you look into the United States, in the growth rate of the green building market, green LEED certified buildings, it's clearly growing above average. And so we want to be part of this growth. Now, what are the next steps? What are the latest developments? Believe us, it took years to get here, to get a recognition, to get a first step in the door, if you want to say so, to be recognized at least in a pilot credit, for social equity within the supply chain, within LEED. Christian and I and James, with the great support of the entire NRMCA, we had so many mails and calls, and we scheduled meetings. We invited the USGBC to conferences to explain to them our case, to say, listen, it cannot be that there's just one material in your system which is able to score. You have to take into consideration all materials, and one of the most important ones in construction is concrete. And finally, we got there. So we got the recognition in the LEED system with the support of James and the NRMCA. So for the first time, a non-wood material is able to score points in the responsible sourcing section of LEED. And with that, we of course have immediately then produced this fact sheet, also together with the NRMCA, geared towards LEED APs to take them by the hand and explain to them step by step what is your way to score within LEED with CSC certified concrete. Yeah, that's it. That's about the story and the journey of the development of the CSC. And James, over to you.
Yes, yeah. So for those who are familiar with EPDs and familiar with our role as an EPD program operator, and who's verifying EPDs through us as an EPD program operator, you know the system for the most part, where the company works with consultants out there and they deliver their documents for verification through NRMCA. So for this CSC, it's going to be somewhat similar, but the only really difference is that the company from a verification is going to align directly with one of the certification bodies. That's the terminology within the CSC for that verification of all the evidence of your company's sustainability efforts. NRMCA, we are there to promote the program, to facilitate those discussions, to if there's any issues with the ranking and the rating, we can hold as judge and potentially jury to make sure everything is going well and that everybody agrees to the review and the verification of that CSC certification. So we are still involved, regional system operator. It's just the company will enter in a direct agreement with a certification body instead of NRMCA. And I just want to further endorse what Christian and Michael said, but probably a little bit more in your face, and I apologize for this, but supply chain sustainability, as I said earlier, is a growing practice within supply chain management. We're starting to see embodied carbon, we're starting to see biodiversity, we're starting to see these questions dip further and further into the supply channel. And as was mentioned during this presentation, having wood certification as the only industry-related supply chain certification acknowledged in many building codes, as well as green building codes, this is something as an industry we want to make sure we're acknowledged and recognized for the hard efforts that we put through to making sure we have a sustainable organization and a sustainable industry. So there is a question, but before we go to that question, please, if there's any other questions, use the question section to ask them and we'll answer them. But some takeaway notes for those on the call. We are seeing enhanced product sustainability that's being discovered in construction documents and specifications. We see it from an EPD perspective. We're starting to see some inquiries that are coming in beyond EPDs about health product hazards in products, as well as responsible sourcing. The bread and butter of our industry when it came to green building contribution has always been recycled content as well as regional material. It's evolving beyond those two things, and that's why you see a big uptake with EPDs within our industry. We're starting to see greater pressure from publicly traded or other investor-backed companies, and that works its way into projects and works its way through contractors as well as material suppliers. And so something like a CSC does allow us to get closer to the influencer, to the decision maker, to try to get that preferred specification. We're competing with other product categories. There's other manufacturers in the wood industry, in the steel industry, aluminum, the glass, and drywall that wants that space on that construction project, whether it's a highway construction with asphalt or whether it's building construction with all those other materials I just mentioned. And they're utilizing sustainability in their branding as well as their marketing communication. And we need to acknowledge that the industry is moving beyond price and performance, although they're extremely important. There will still be major decisions being made on those. And environmental, social, and governance practices are starting to creep in the top 5 decision making when it comes to doing business with organizations and selecting products. The 4th bullet item, we just want to get beyond that. There's other certifications out there other than forest. We have our CSC, but we also want to help promote steel and aluminum, stone and copper, just because we want forests not to be the only ones that have that preferred monopoly, in their perspective preferred, but that monopoly of a certification system for supply chain. Hey, we were one of the first ones to engage in EPDs. We've been building a great reputation on EPDs to disclose our environmental impacts, and we're positioned to meet further disclosure requirements in the future. For those who want to build out their sustainability brand beyond EPDs, the CSC is that sustainability framework you should consider, and we can help you out with that. So, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or other the colleagues at the CSC to help you understand what it's all about, go in more detail and more strategic discussions on how you may want to create the business case for your organization. So I have 3 questions that came in. Number 1 being, there's not an RSO for Canada. Do they, and Christian and Michael, would they go directly to CSC, or could they utilize NRMCA as the US RSO to help certify their plants?
Christian, you want to answer?
Well, they can obviously directly go to the CSC. That is welcome if there's no regional system operator in place. NRMCA is the system operator for the United States, but obviously if they want to support their business in Canada, this is of course welcome. And the CSC, if there's interest from the Canadian side, is more than happy to have a dialogue with a potential regional system operator for Canada.
The next question, how many sites have been certified in the US and at what levels? Right now, there are 4 certifications that are active. There were 5 that have expired, but there are 4 that are active right now. They just received certification over the summertime, and they're at the silver level, I think all 4. Is that correct, Michael or Christian?
Christian can answer this. I can say they are in the Phoenix area in the greater Seattle area, correct?
Yes, correct. They are in the greater Seattle area. 2 of them, they have been done by Catman, and 2 have been done by Hanson Aggregates in the Phoenix areas. All of them are at the level of silver. So you see that well-managed companies, they are able to do, if they go for CSC certification without being able to build on their supply chain, it is possible to achieve silver certification.
And again, silver is at the time, it's the maximum that a concrete company can realize, because this is also about supply chain. To be aligned with everything that we're seeing in other industries, dipping into the supply chain, trying to improve the supply chain. Obviously, rising tide lifts all boats, and that's a very similar philosophy with this, that we need to get aggregates and cement part of this system to improve the concrete certification system.
Michael,
I'm sorry?
Michael, maybe that you want to give a very short information how this was done in Latin America. I think Holcim improved there to gold certification by including the supply chain.
Yeah, and James, you're also raising a very important issue, this chicken egg issue. So if you are a concrete plant and you want to obtain a certain also good level of certification, then you look around, and if you're one of the first movers, you don't have certified suppliers, and the system is designed in a way that it depends, or it relies on not only the concrete plant but also on suppliers, basically cement and aggregates. And so we have consciously, the CSC has consciously designed the system in a way that this is possible, so that you can, without having a supplier around, get a decent certification level, silver, in the first step. What we have seen then once markets are taking up, that you see more and more then also especially cement and some aggregate suppliers also doing certification, and then it goes hand in hand. And that exactly happened in some markets, some Latin American markets as well, where our company had concrete certificates in the first place, level silver, and then once we had first cement plant close by, then we could update the certificate and get a gold level then for those concrete plants. So that's a bit in the starting phase, or in the starting mode. You also have to be compromised. It is important to get in the supply chain. James and Christian and I, when we talk to the USGBC, and also when the CSC talk to other green building labels, the question will come immediately, or it will become an issue if you're not able to demonstrate that you're willing and capable of covering the entire supply chain. The moment someone is looking behind the scenes and looks into the materialities of the supply chain of concrete, they will look into cement and aggregates, and so it is a prerequisite that we are also covering this once the system is evolving.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Michael. I just want to make a point that was addressed in the questions, that there are some state legislation that we're starting to see, and it's going beyond EPDs. And so within the state of Washington, their capital budget proviso that my colleague Tian Peng had mentioned in questions, that with fair labor and some of the social criteria within that state legislation, we believe the CSC certification does apply and comply with that, and possibly could be utilized to meet with the criteria of state legislation. I don't expect at this time that we're going to see this in many other states. Tien can correct me if I'm wrong. Obviously, the left coast with California, Oregon, and Washington are proactive. We're starting to see EPD legislation work its way across the U.S. in certain states. So from a fair labor and other types of working conditions, I'm curious how that's going to work its way also. But there was a question on the period of time between certifications. The certification for a 3-year period, and then you would go through a recertification. Did I misquote that, Christian?
That is absolutely correct. We have the CSC certificate is valid for 3 years, and after 3 years, you the recertification process. Typically, you have gained the experience. You can use of many of your documentation from the prior certification process. So yes, it has to be done after 3 years. Typically, the effort is you will be faster in going for recertification than when doing this for the first time.
Like anything, for those who are also doing EPDs, collecting all that operations data to an EPD is collecting your corporate data, your corporate policies, your corporate procedures for the CSC certification. So if I can draw any parallels between the EPD process and the CSC process, there's going to be some internal investment to collect all the information. Hopefully a lot of that is already available within your organization. Hopefully you have a code of conduct. Hopefully you have an ethics program. Things like this are the evidence that's required within the CSC that you would upload that evidence. So, and we're here to help you, NRMCA as a regional system operator, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us. So that's all the questions. We did answer all of those. I want to thank everybody for participating, especially our CSC colleagues, Michael and Christian from Europe, and Please be on the lookout for additional webinars, education, communication, promotion of the CSC in our marketplace, in the US marketplace, over the course of the next several years. This is something we believe is extremely important that positions us to compete against other product categories that have already been acknowledged in a variety of green building systems and or in just general perceptions within our influencer marketplace of engineers, architects, contractors, designers. So thank you very much for your attendance. I'm going to stop recording. This recording will be available and placed on the NRMCA website in a matter of several days if you need to review it again. So, hey, thank you very much, everybody, for participating. Reach out to me if you have questions. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, James. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.